to really come to fruition, as Tom listed out this really long list of technologies, it sounds amazing. When you think about, and Zet's anecdote about the musical worker from Cape Town, said, well, I've been there for 16 years and I keep hearing about these technologies and yet the problems are not being addressed. So let us be clear that Africa has a leadership role to play, but let us also be clear on what we need to get there. And with that, thank you all for joining us, and thank you again to our speakers for joining us both virtually, and as I said, thanks for joining us here in person. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ryan.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. 1 hour.
We are waiting if we can get more people.
Fanfare?
1, 2, 3, yes. Get seated, please. No, don't stay. Don't run away. Okay. Three more minutes. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. good morning for those who are online and from the other side of the world, and good night for the other side of, because you have all hours. So we welcome to this session, and I'll be moderating this session. My name is Antoine Karingandire. Actually, I'm having two hats. I'm a scientist with C4 aircraft based in Bamako, Mali. But in this forum, I'm having the hat of the International Land Coalition, where I'm coordinating one of their platform, community-based ecosystems. So I'm having those two hats. If you want to approach me, preferably from the International Land Coalition for Communities. Okay, thank you very much. So we are having this session, which is actually, the theme is, as you know, climate change introduces and makes worst impacts spreading beyond countries. And we have wars, conflicts, social unrest, as well as unsustainable use of natural resources. All those are common challenges whose impacts are worsened by climate change. So this session will be discussing effective ways of addressing transboundary challenges in the face of climate change. So that is the main theme. So luckily we are having 4 eminent panelists, speakers, who will bring in their experiences, their work, and before going far, I would like to invite them on the podium, and I will start by Dr. Ahmed Zanya Bougri, or Bougri, sorry. Dr. Bougri is a senior migrant protection and assistant advisor in the Department of Health, Humanitarian Affairs and Social Development from the African Union. Welcome, Dr. Bougri. The second panelist is Mrs. Laura Kramer from my sister institution, IRI, and Laura is a leader of priorities and policies for climate smart agriculture. Welcome, Laura. The third panelist is Mr. David Liposo. Liposo is the Energy Access Officer from USAID. So fourth, not least but not last, we are having Mrs. Hindi Asaniu Benani, who is a thematic regional specialist on migration, environment, and climate change from the International Organization for Migration. I think I didn't forget, and we have 4 for the time being. And if there is anyone who wants to join as a panelist, you are most welcome. Anyone? Please, don't be shy. Come and join them. So now, as I said, the theme is quite big and large, but we have the experts on board. So I would like to give them 2 minutes each so that they can introduce themselves and tell us from their experiences, their work, their professional life, how they should be relating the theme, especially when we have collaboration in addressing common problems for transformative adaptation and resilience. And I will start by Dr. Bougri.
Good afternoon, everyone. As our moderator has aptly said, my name is Ahmed Bougri. I'm a senior advisor on migrant protection and assistance at the African Union Commission. I have worked in the area of migration for 15 years, and it is the first time that within the African Union that we are looking at the linkages between climate change and migration. Of course, as you know, the nexus between migration and climate change has been a scientifically contested issue, mainly from developed countries. But for Africa, those of us who live and work in Africa know that climate change is a reality. Of course, now you can open the TV and everyone's talking about climate change. But what is being said has been said in Africa for many years. But there hasn't been that direct link between climate change and migration. So this year, I'm the focal person at the African Union to kind of mainstream climate change and migration issues. That is the main purpose why I am here. The African Union, and I will just maybe mention a couple of things. When you look at the African Union instruments in terms of protection of migrants or refugees, since 1969, the African Union Convention for Refugees, the OU Convention, actually mentions climatic situations or environmental extremities as one of the bases of seeking asylum or being a refugee, which is quite limited within the 1951 Convention. And therefore we are sort of pushing that forward and acknowledging that climate change can indeed cause forced migration or voluntary migration, because migration in itself in Africa has always been an adaptation issue. People have moved within the continent. Is a continent of mobility, from young people seeking employment elsewhere because of degrading climatic conditions in their area. I myself grew up from the northern part of Ghana, and when I was younger, the rivers had water for us to have kind of plant onions and tomatoes during the dry season, and nowadays there's none. So when you go to northern Ghana, you will see that most of the young people have actually migrated from rural areas into the cities, so rural-urban migration. The second thing that I would also want to say is that the African Union has an instrument, a legal instrument, the only legal instrument in the world that protects IDPs, the Kampala Convention in 2009. And specifically, again, provides a comprehensive framework for protection. Unfortunately, very few member states of the African Union have ratified or domesticated that instrument. The final thing that I would say is that the African Union has got a comprehensive policy framework called the Migration Policy Framework for Africa, an action plan that actually looks at migration governance on the continent. And one of the issues that is specifically being addressed is the nexus between migration and climate change. So I would stop here. I know that our discussion will grow, and then I'm available to talk to you much more on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bugri, the doctor, sorry. So I think migration is, as you said, has been a big issue. It is being big now with conflicts which are happening in Africa, most of the regions. And I think the instruments you are talking about will help us really to understand better on this. Laura, you have the floor for 2 minutes.
Thank you. Hi everyone, thanks for having me on this panel. My name is Laura Kramer. I work for the International Livestock Research Institute, as well as the Alliance for Biodiversity and International Center for Tropical Agriculture. And within those institutions, there is a program called Accelerating the Impacts of CGIAR Climate Research for Africa. And this is a program that works in the research for development space around agriculture, food security, and climate change. And I think on this panel, we all come from different perspectives in terms of cross-border impacts of climate change. From the agriculture and food security perspective, climate change is having an enormous impact on food security and production. And we know that within agriculture, within Africa, it supports a huge amount of the national GDP. It supports so many millions of livelihoods. And so this is a really important space for us where we are working not only at the ground level with farmers, testing new interventions and getting from them what are they doing to adapt, but we're also then taking that evidence and trying to use it and incorporate it into policies and priorities for climate smart agriculture. So the work that I do is really focused on engaging with partners and stakeholders to get these sorts of concerns into national policies and also regional and continental policies, and to address these issues with those sorts of instruments. And we know that countries need to develop their policies for interventions within their own borders, but the impacts of climate change cross borders, and so we're trying to work with our partners and see how can we incorporate these cross-border concerns into things like nationally determined contributions and long-term strategies. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Laura. Also, you have the floor.
Thank you, Antoine. So my name is David Raposo. And at the risk of eating it into my 2 minutes, I just first and very briefly want to thank all of you for joining us this afternoon, late in the afternoon, third day of an intellectually and emotionally exhausting conference. I think that we're all very privileged to be sharing this space with you, and I'm very much looking forward to the conversation. I belong to the U.S. Agency for International Development, and within USAID, I support Power Africa. Power Africa, is a public-private partnership comprised of about 150 private businesses, more than a dozen U.S. government agencies, and about as many development partners all over the world. And we all are joined in our ambition, and we have been since 2013 when we first started this project, to build 30,000 megawatts of new power capacity and to bring electrical connections to 60 million African homes and businesses. As I said, we've been at it for just shy of a decade, and we are about halfway to those goals. The perspective that I will bring today is narrow. So I'll be looking at this adaptation, transboundary impacts through the lens of what that means for power sectors. So I want to acknowledge that that is kind of a reductionist view to a very vexing problem that touches many sectors. Nevertheless, I think that there are interesting angles along that, and I look forward to exploring those with all of you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks, David. I think it is important to have you on board, especially when you come to private sector experience, because I think it has been an issue, and I think it was yesterday was one of the sections which was discussing about the private sector and investments, and I think the audience is having now chance of discussing this issue now while we are here from the USA perspective. Hindi, you have now the next floor, to give us to introduce yourself.
Thank you very much, Dr. Antoine. So I call you by your first name and doctor, so it's okay. So hi everyone, and I extend my thanks to all of you for being here. I see familiar faces now. You were in the audience this morning. So I'm Hinde Issa-Rubinani. I'm from IOM, the International Organization for Migration. I'm sitting in Dakar, Senegal, and I cover West and Central Africa on the thematic of the human mobility in the context of climate change, environmental degradation, and disaster. So my role here in Dakar is, of course, to keep on advocating for the integration of human mobility in the discussions on climate change. Also to support the government in better integrating, in better dialogue between the two sectors, migration and environment, and other policy sectors that are concerned. And I'm very happy to be here with my colleague from the African Union. And definitely, we are not in a continent where we have like a lot of climate. We don't have climate skeptical governments here, so we are very lucky to work on this because governments are super convinced, and we can witness the effects of climate change on a daily basis. My role also is to support my colleagues who are in the country offices of the region to develop intervention and concrete interventions. So it's been like around 4 years. IOM is the first agency to have administrative division dedicated to migration, environment and climate change. So it's been 4 years that we are on the ground developing solutions, knowledge production, policy work and community-based action. I will maybe go further on that later on. And I'm here with my colleague Noura Makela, who is representing the regional office in Nairobi. So if you have any question related to East and Horn Africa, please do not hesitate. So happy to be here and with you, dear panelists, and happy to have this conversation.
Thank you very much, Indy. I think migration is key nowadays, not only from conflicts, but as you said, from the environmental disasters. People, I think my colleague here, Dr. Bugli, said about it. So I think it's quite important to discuss about this in this session, and I invite the audience to really be participative in this discussion to have more information. Thank you very much, speakers. Now we go straight to the subject now, and I would like to have from your perspective, your background, your work engagement. Please enlighten us more about the subject. Following these two questions, what are the greatest transboundary challenges Africa is currently facing, and how much has climate change made worse these challenges? So please give us, you have 5 minutes to discuss this, to give us the information. And audience, after this we'll be having floor for you, and you can, so you have your time now. Just listen carefully, put down your questions, and we answer. I am expecting them to answer them very after that. Dr. Bugli, you are having the floor now.
Thank you, Chair and Moderator. We know that Africa has a history of colonialism, which is hardly discussed, and that has created the artificial boundaries that we see. Traveling in Africa is difficult. To go to Addis from Cameroon or Gabon is easier to travel to France than to go to Accra from here. Not only in terms of expenses, but also border bureaucracies. So those are the challenges that we face on a continent that is divided based on artificial boundaries. And we have kind of put this in our minds so strongly that our communities move. We know that within the West African region, or even Central African region, is the same people, just divided by boundaries and borders. And why do I say that? Because the challenge comes when climate extremities come, people move. Migration is an adaptation issue. People have always moved. For example, my My paternal grandparents come from Burkina Faso across the river in Ghana because of desertification which was coming into Burkina Faso from Mali. My grandmother comes from Togo, and I was born and raised in Ghana. But it is difficult for me to travel from Ghana to Burkina or to Togo if it wasn't because of the ECOWAS issues. And even because of that, there are still some difficulties that you can travel. So transnational travel is a challenge. And this has got significance in terms of mobility of people, in terms of forced migration, but also in terms of displacements. You can talk about Congo and Rwanda, the exacerbation that has now come. Why? Because climate change is not only a direct cause for people to move, but also it works with other factors as a multiplier to exacerbate existing conditions within the continent itself. And one of the things that the African Union has been trying to push, or apart from the legal instruments for protection that I mentioned before, is the Free Movement Protocol. This protocol will enable cross-border mobility, especially pastoralists. Let me give you an example, again using from where I come from. Between Burkina Faso and Ghana used to have Fulani herdsmen, pastoralists. In the dry seasons, they cross the border into Ghana, graze their cattle, and go back. Nowadays, they use armed conflict because the Ghanaians are saying that the desert is encroaching on the north, so you have no space to come. So there is conflict within communities that used to live in peace before. And if there was this free movement protocol applied, then most people will move freely. As you know, 80% of mobility of persons happens within the continent. Usually the narrative is concentrating on people going to Europe because we see the TV pictures of people dying on the desert and Libya, blah, blah. But most of the movement of young people is just across the boundaries from one country to the other. And most of it, young people looking for better opportunities. That exposes them to human trafficking, especially girls and children who are smuggled into cocoa farms or harvesting of tomatoes or whatever. And therefore these challenges exist. But if the continent had a free mobility of persons in terms of legalized, then it will enhance people to move. The Free Movement Protocol was adopted, in 2018. Only 4 countries in Africa have ratified it out of 55 countries. So we are calling on member states. We're calling on civil society. We're calling on our partner organizations to sensitize the governments to understand that this is a benefit for all of us, especially within the context of the exacerbation of climate change, as we see the more people are moving because of the result of climate change. I think I will stop here. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Dr. Bugi. I think it is quite important, this issue of colonialism, not only across different countries. You gave a good example of the pastoralist. Not only pastoralists, but even within the same country, you have an issue of even for communities moving from one community to another one. We have examples in different countries across the continent. So I think it's quite important to discuss about this thing. And you said you were from Burkina Faso and mom is coming from where? And now it is quite of a problem of conflicts when it comes to politics, because when you say it somewhere, they say, so you can't do this, you can't do this because you are saying you are from Burkina Faso. Thank you very much anyway. We have time to discuss about it. And I invite Laura to go to the same question. Thanks, Laura.
Thank you. I'm glad you brought up pastoralism. That is definitely in my planned remarks. When you asked me from a food security and agriculture perspective, what are the top transboundary issues facing Africa, I come up with two. One is expanding crop and livestock pests and diseases, and the other is trade disruptions. So we know that pests and diseases within crops and livestock, of course, don't respect borders, and this can impact agricultural production. It impacts people's livelihoods and even their own health, because some of these are zoonotic diseases. So, and the trade interacts with these things, because if there's an outbreak of a disease in a certain country, maybe within livestock, their export of meat or live animals may be banned to other countries, and then that hurts the people who are raising those animals. Same thing with trade between countries. You know, I don't think any country is self-sufficient in food, and so being able to trade food, especially in times of drought, is important to ensure food security within our countries. And so those trade disruptions, if they happen, really hurt people who are smallholder farmers, because those are often net buyers of food, and the urban poor as well, because food price increases restrict access and then hurts food security for people. So, you know, these interact with each other. Also, in terms of trade, may bring in disease. If you are importing fruit and veg that brings in some sort of pest that then spreads into your local production, that can have an impact as well. And we know that climate change is exacerbating these, because the range of pests and diseases is changing due to increases in temperatures, changes in rainfall patterns. We see pests outbreaks in places that we haven't seen before, and also disease outbreaks. For example, we know in Kenya, El Nino is linked to increased rainfall, and that is linked to increased outbreaks of Rift Valley fever within livestock. So, you know, these changes in climate are really affecting the changes, or the food security of people. So, yeah, there's also changes in the immunity of livestock. Increased heat lowers their feed intake and then makes them more susceptible to disease, which just exacerbates things as well. And then ticks and tick-borne diseases expand. And you know, the trade disruptions, when we think of cross-border risks and people movement, we might be thinking just of cross borders, but the trade cross-border things can happen. If there's drought in Australia, it can impact the food prices here in Africa. And so those kind of telecoupled links need to be considered as well. So, you know, and as Africa is urbanizing, more and more people are reliant on the food that they buy in the market, and these price increases can really have an effect. So addressing the climate crisis and improving agriculture sustainably so that we can improve production and not be as reliant on imports, I think is really important. So those are the top two cross-boundary issues that I would say we're facing, and how climate change is exacerbating them. Thank you.
Thanks, Laura. I think you brought in an interesting subject where Dr. Bugi is saying that we are opening borders, and you are saying that opening borders now without bringing our friends pastoralists with their cows with the mouth diseases of the cat will be a problem. So now I think that's on the other side. I think the African Union Commission is trying to put in controls of this kind of disease and disasters, and I think the idea of opening borders will not make much disasters on disease if we put in functional control systems. David, you have the floor.
Thank you. So once again, the question put to all of us from the moderator was, what is the greatest challenge? And I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that, right? But what I can offer are challenges associated with transboundary climate change adaptation in the power sector, which I think would be interesting to consider. When I think about those kinds of challenges, I see them as any other natural resource management challenge. That is to say that the challenge would be greatest where the impacted resource is shared among many nations. And in the context of a power system, the obvious kind of analog that jumps out to me is hydropower. And we see hydropower challenges playing out in the context of African energy systems, wherever we look for them. A couple of potentially obvious ones that really jump off the page from my perspective. The Grand Renaissance Dam in Ethiopia, which will bring electricity to many millions and create a lot of foreign exchange for Ethiopia, a cascade of positive benefits to many, but also many negative outcomes for almost everyone downstream. A reduction in flow of something on the order of 25% in an incredibly important river system. They've been, the Sudanese, the Egyptians, and the Ethiopians have been negotiating over these challenges for something like a decade. And there is no resolution to this conflict in sight. This is one that is likely to endure, possibly to be exacerbated by the changes that we all anticipate. Similarly, in Zambia, I see an energy system that is enormously exposed to risk associated with comparatively minor perturbations in the hydrologic cycle. If you look at their portfolio of generation assets, they have quite a lot of hydropower. And it's not just that, but Kenya has a lot of hydropower. But Zambia's is unique because the river systems that they have tapped are extraordinarily vulnerable in the Zambezi and elsewhere in that watershed. When we are in periods of drought, as we are right now, there is no power available through those dams. And so that too causes a cascade of bad outcomes that accrue to the Zambian energy system. Some that you would expect, others that you might not. When they can't generate hydropower on their own, they have to instead buy it from South Africa, which causes a sort of its own cascade of bad outcomes, economic bad outcomes associated with foreign exchange, shaving points off of their gross domestic product. But nevertheless, what's concerning to me is that there are plans for expansion of hydropower around the continent, and it's a renewable resource, it's carbon free. There are a lot of good attributes to hydropower. We should explore that wherever it's available. However, SAP, the Southern Africa Power Pool, as it looks out into the future, it sees the opportunity for more than 6,000 megawatts of new hydropower projects, and many of them are in these very climate vulnerable river systems. So we can expect these phenomena that we're already observing in energy systems like Zambia to start to proliferate and to become worse, with the worst outcomes accruing to the most vulnerable. Another outcome of all of this as time goes by, and this is the last data point that I'll offer up, is that investors are taking notice, and in particular debt providers are starting to look at the risk profile of hydro development and see uncertainty, where before they thought that they could see into the future and understand what the hydrologic profile of a given river system might be for years to come. They no longer can. And the uncertainty they ascribe in that calculation is manifested as a higher cost of capital for those that want to develop the next generation of hydropower projects. So as you can see, This is a problem that is going to endure, potentially get worse, and the worst outcomes of this phenomenon are going to be borne by electricity ratepayers. So I'll leave it at that, but I would welcome any questions that anyone has on that.
Thank you very much, David. Not only the river systems are affected, as you said, regarding energy. We have across the continent where you have lakes which disappeared. And this is affecting, we have the example of some lakes which disappeared in Rwanda. We have the Lake Chad which is nearly finishing. And not only it affects the energy systems, but it affects the food system, as Laura said. So it is the people who are thinking that climate is there, changes are there, and you see them coming and just making waste to the communities. Thank you very much, David. So, Hindi, you have the floor on the same questions.
Thank you very much. So, I would just like to highlight the fact that climate-induced migration is first and foremost internal migration. I mean, you can read the Kramer report, for example, of the World Bank, and definitely, if we want to address human mobility in the context of climate change, environmental degradation, and disaster, we need to look at internal migration. So we are talking about transboundary issues, but it's very important also that we do not forget that internal migration is very important, and so just wanted to stress this. I mean, in terms of challenge, is that we keep on having an apocalyptic narrative on migration, human mobility. I'm talking about the West and Central Africa, and a kind of a distorted narrative. You explained this very well. We produced together the African Migration Report a few years ago. I like the first chapter on challenging the narrative, and definitely, 6%, if I remember well, of the transoceanic migration is done irregularly. So it's very important to, and in the region I cover, 90 to 95% of international migration is done within the region. So it's very important that we look at the facts and the trends, and that we address the real issues. So, and when you add the climate change, it's becoming, you have the three, and migration, West Africa, and climate change, you have the three ingredients for the apocalyptic recipe. And it's very important that we keep on advocating for a fairer narrative of the migration and human mobility, which has always been a strategy of adaptation on the continent. The other challenge, and then the narrative of the Sahel too, which tends to be super apocalyptic, and on the youth also. And I'm thinking of the youth of the Sahel, which is very dynamic too. And when I read project documents, because this is my main job, I'm kind of shocked at the way we describe also the youth in the Sahel. I would be a Sahelian mother, I would be very angry, to tell you the truth. So yeah, I think that it's very important that we keep on working on the narrative to work on the fair basis. The other challenge that I see, it's about cities and urbanization too. In the region where I cover, the coastline, if I remember well, at the end of the day, and I'm not very good at figures, but 56% of the regional GDP, and I think 1/3 of the population. So the coastline and cities are areas of opportunities for the youth and the migrants of the region. And cities are under the pressure, you could say the triple pressure of demographics, but also climate change with coastal erosion, And in Dakar, we just had like a kind of devastating floods 3 weeks ago, and it happens regularly. And it happens in Bamako, in Niamey, and more. Well, Bamako and Niamey are not on the coastline, but I mean, cities are under this pressure of climate change, demographics, and we really need to support the local governments in having this integrated approach and see how we can support the local governments in facing these enormous challenges. Maybe one third challenge that I see is like that it's linked to my first one on internal migration too, but that we keep on forgetting the most invisible. I mean, a lot of rural women, and we just made like this study in Niger on migration environments and climate change, and there is the trend of women migrating more and more, rural women migrating more and more. We used to say that they stay behind. Now they start migrating and to the cities. And for example, they do work, for example, in the care sector, and we keep on invisibilizing the role, the essential role of this woman, and this is exactly the same reflection that I have on labor migrants in agriculture. They play an essential role. It's a very strong labor force in the region. They contribute to the GDP, and definitely we need to address the needs of protection of these migrants, and also the essential role, and design solutions that don't oppose their social rights and the environmental rights of the host communities. And the last but not least, is that we keep on, we need to break the silos, and also, and I come to collaboration here too, and specifically within the donor community, who keeps on having migrations, policies and environmental policies, and we need to break the silos so that we do not let some categories of people, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hindi. You raise a quite interesting point on how the communities are affected by impacted. We talked about the youth of the Sahel, but I don't think it is only for the Sahel. It is across the continent, because most of the youth in our regions are being affected by this. And you talked about women, and I should add on this the indigenous people. The indigenous people in the rainforests in different parts of Africa are being affected by this kind of, and we should be part of the communities we'll be talking about. Now, thank you very much. One of the panelists disappeared. What happened? I'm sorry, one of the panelists is, and it is time for questions. And you heard about the Indian speakers about how they gave their challenges across the country, the continent. They talked about migration. They talked about the food system. So the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, maybe. How many questions? Okay, I don't know. So two questions or 3, and unfortunately, one of the speakers is not there. You get time to answer when he comes back. And the floor is open. And if there is anyone online who to ask the question, please go ahead. Raise your hands. Okay, please go ahead. And give your name.
Ahmed Oyama, écrivain gabonais. J'ai 2 questions. Je constate qu'actuellement, les changements climatiques créent des conflits, pour l'instant qui sont communautaires. On a vu dans certains pays d'Afrique de l'Est où des agriculteurs se battent contre des éleveurs à cause d'un cours d'eau qui a gagné. Actuellement, c'est communautaire, et puis les migrations, on compris tout à l'heure. Mais je vais un peu plus loin. Est-ce qu'il n'y a pas un risque de conflit entre États? Parce qu'on a remarqué qu'il y a des États qui se partagent les mêmes colos. On a vu le problème qu'il y a eu au Nil, dernièrement avec le barrage qui a voulu être érigé, et il y a un problème entre l'Égypte et ses voisins. Est-ce qu'avec les changements climatiques, on va arriver à un niveau où ce ne sera plus une migration simple, mais des guerres de conquête de territoires pour avoir des ressources? Une fois que les ressources seront de plus en plus rares. Donc, si ce risque est avéré, ma question c'est de savoir, la seconde question c'est de savoir, est-ce que le système des Nations Unies ou bien l'Union africaine a pris les mesures nécessaires pour ne pas être surpris? Parce que c'est un risque. Tout risque peut se produire. Donc c'est à envisager. Parce qu'au départ, c'est d'abord des petits conflits communautaires. Après, ça peut être des conflits entre États. Parce que quand il faut suivre, maintenant, on se bat pour avoir la ressource pour sa population. C'était ça mes deux questions.
Any hand online? Okay. No.
Thank you very much. I'm called Zonzuo. I work with a feminist organization called Linkages, and I'm very interested in the AU Free Mobility Convention. It just got my attention because I deliberately came by road from Cameroon, so it took me 3 days. Just because I wanted to also understand and just see Gabon from close by. And for sure, as a citizen, I could tell you about the border bureaucracy. It was not easy for me, but then somehow I got myself here. So I want to know, because the convention, for sure, when we hear of an AU convention, it means that this was a conversation and consultation with the member states. So how come they are not adopting or ratifying the convention? And in terms of power relations, because we understand in as much as we say we are all Africans, there is issue of power. So how is that addressed in the protocol? Thank you.
Yeah, last one, yeah, madame.
Merci. Alors, je suis madame Zimbi Dédé Georgette Coco, productrice et transformatrice des produits agricoles. Ma question est la suivante. Pour ceux qui sont du Gabon, nous faisons la production dans la zone de la Remoué. C'est environ à 50 km de Libreville. Bon, nous sommes confrontés à un problème dans cette zone. Le problème, c'est le conflit homme-faune. Donc les pachydermes dévastent de nos plantations. Donc je voudrais savoir, est-ce que c'est aussi dû au changement climatique ou pour vous qui avez peut-être certainement eu ce genre de problème, quelle a été la solution selon chacun dans son pays? Merci.
Okay. Last one. There is a gentleman, Dokona. There are coming many now. Okay, very quick, just go to the point.
Ok, merci. Madame Marie-Julie, mission de la paix du Gabon. Je vais vous poser la question sur l'immigration. Chez nous, au Gabon, nous avions un problème sur le déplacement des éléphants. Les éléphants ne trouvent plus leur lieu. Ils ne sont plus dans leur environnement. Ils viennent nous retrouver en pleine ville. C'est-à-dire, dans ma région, je suis au sud-est du Gabon, plus précisément à Bongoville. Donc les éléphants traversent les fleuves et viennent nous retrouver en pleine ville. Nos champs sont dévastés, ce que l'homme est en conflit avec les éléphants. Comment régler ce genre de conflit? C'est ce que nos populations sont en train de vivre plus maintenant, en ce moment. Nous n'arrivons plus à manger convenablement. Les éléphants viennent dévaster nos champs. Nous sommes en conflit. Donc je demande à M. Bouki comment les Nations Unies ou alors l'Union africaine peut trouver régler ce genre de conflit entre l'homme et la flore.
Okay, last one.
Merci.
Just go to the point straight. Yeah.
Je suis Odin Mongema. Je travaille dans l'ONG qui fait dans les peuples autochtones. Je vous ai posé la question concernant le changement climatique. Autrefois, nous avons compris que le changement climatique provient des émissions de gaz à effet de serre qui dégradent la couche d'ozone. nous, le changement climatique provient des émissions de gaz à effet de serre qui dégagent la couche d'ozone. Et le dioxyde de carbone est absorbé par le bassin du Congo qui préserve la plus grande partie du flux de la forêt africaine. En fait, ce qui m'inquiète beaucoup plus, c'est que il y a le réchauffement climatique. Le soleil est un fait naturel, mais nous avons l'absence de pluie. S'il n'y a pas de pluie, comment est-ce que le bassin du Congo va subsister pour résister au changement climatique, notamment au réchauffement climatique? Et surtout ça mon inquiétude, et je me dis que c'est là-bas le fondement du problème du changement climatique qui fait l'objet de tous les débats. Je vous remercie.
Wow, that is a good one. Anyway, the panelists, you have the floor. There have been different questions, conflicts between countries. I think it has been said, I think from Bugri, he said about it, free movements. It has been asked by so many questions. The diseases, are they due to climate change issues? He gave an example of the vache fall, the mad cow disease, I think. Is it due to is it due to so every person maybe you can give us some ideas. The conflict between animals and humans is an issue not only in Gabon, it is in East Africa. You have the same. We have in Kenya, it has been a big issue between animals, national parks, management and things like that, and humans. So, and the emission of gases and so forth. So, Dr. Bubu, you have the floor if you can tackle the question. Just be quick so that we don't have much time left.
Thank you so much. I appreciate our brother from Gabon who has raised the question between security and free movement. The two are different. The fundamental basis of the African Union or African or OAU was based on an Pan-African idea that all Africans are one people. And for integration to happen, there must be necessarily the movement of people and of goods and services. When you limit these, you limit development. You can see that within Africa, our power of negotiations within the world system is a bit weaker. Why? Because of weaker integration policies that we have. So free movement does not mean that anyone can just get up one day and just move to a different place. No, free movement means that you have the opportunity to move, yeah, whether voluntarily, but in most cases, we look at migration, the narrative is irregular migration or what people call illegal migration. But I don't like the word illegal because no one is illegal. You cross a border, you break the rule, but you are not illegal yourself. Huh? You are breaking a rule. So irregular migration is because there are no legal pathways to travel. And that is what we are advocating for. The principle of free movement is based on the Charter of the African Union itself that calls for a wider integration of people because our boundaries are artificial. As I told you, border countries, people across border countries do not know boundaries. For example, I live in northern part of Ghana. People cross into Burkina. They don't even have passports. But it is facilitated because within the West African region, there is the ECOWAS free movement protocol. So people move freely. I, for instance, to travel to many African countries, one of the impediments is visa and stamps. It's very costly to travel in Africa. You have one passport, within 6 months it's full. And the bureaucracy that you go through to get that done is difficult. That does not encourage development. And for the African Union, migration and development are linked. And we have the example of the European Union. Of course, there are parities of economies, but we can do the same in Africa. Yeah. So when we talk about free movement, it is not that anyone can just get up and move to a different country the next day. No, there are rules, there are regulations that look at the issues of terrorism nowadays and security as well. So maybe I will stop here before. But many countries do not want to ratify the convention, the protocol, because of security issues.
You have the floor to tackle the questions which have been asked by.
Thank you. That one needs a new battery, I think. Okay. I don't know if I'll be able to tackle all the questions. I first want to go back to the remarks about pastoralism and migration. Ilri is such a supporter of the free movement of pastoralists across borders. It's absolutely critical. So I hope I didn't misspeak or be misunderstood with my last remarks. You know, there are issues of disease, but that can be dealt with by vaccination campaigns, with early warning systems. And so, you know, it is really important that pastoralists are allowed to move. And I think, like Dr. Antoine said, not just between country borders, but also internally between county borders or, you know, district borders. That's important as well. So I just wanted to make that statement there. In terms of, I think, you know, there were two questions about wildlife, human-wildlife conflict. I don't know the exact situation here in Gabon, but what I would say is there's a lot that we can learn from each other because Kenya deals with, I'm based in Kenya. Kenya deals with the same thing in terms of, you know, lions attacking the cattle and the sheep and goats of the Maasai and the Turkana, and the Kenya Wildlife Service comes in to help and to mitigate those incidences. So I think one of the things that can help us address transboundary challenges in general is the information sharing and the learning from each other. And so that's one thing that I think is really needed in terms of learning within regional economic communities, learning at the continental level, and being able to exchange those experiences so that we can deal with it. Thank you.
David, you have the floor.
So I don't believe there were any questions that were posed specifically around power. So I did duck out for just a moment, and I apologize. But the gentleman in the back who raised a very important point about the Congo Basin, and I'd like to just dwell on that for a moment. You're absolutely right, sir. I mean, the Congo Basin is an incredibly important forest system, the lungs of the world, as you put it. But that's not the least of it. There are many other important functions that resource plays for us all. And among them, it's an important sequestration source for carbon, which, since we're here today, this week, talking about climate change, I think that's germane to all of this, the sequestration role that the Congo Basin can play. And around the world, there's a growing understanding of that importance, and there's a willingness to pay for it. And as years go by, that willingness only increases. A market, in fact, has emerged around that challenge, such that there are developed nations and even corporations that are now willing to pay the DRC to conserve the forest. As the climate changes, the stewardship of that resource is going to become progressively more costly. Unfortunately, I can't allay your concerns about that. You're absolutely right. That is what's going to happen. But when I consider that, I'm heartened by the idea that a market now exists to direct capital into that challenge from the world's corporations and the world's developed nations into what is an incredibly important shared global resource that we all benefit from.
Hind, you have the floor. Yeah.
Thank you. May I answer in French currently?
Yeah, go ahead, there is
all the questions.
translation in both French and English.
Merci beaucoup pour vos questions. Ça va être très très rapide. Je pense que ma première, ce sera par rapport à la question du conflit, changement climatique. Je pense que ce qu'il faut bien comprendre, c'est que le changement climatique ne vient pas causer forcément des conflits de manière systématique, mais il vient aggraver des systèmes. C'est ce que mon collègue disait tout à l'heure. Et il vient aggraver. Donc on parle de facteurs multiplicateurs. Donc à situation donnée, le changement climatique vient aggraver les inégalités, les vulnérabilités, etc. Et sur la question du conflit, bien évidemment, c'est-à-dire que c'est aussi pour dire que la question du conflit, c'est comme la question des catastrophes. Pourquoi est-ce qu'on dit plus catastrophe naturelle? C'est parce que catastrophe, pour que ce soit une catastrophe, il y a une conjonction de facteurs, donc il faut qu'il y ait un aléa naturel, plus une exposition et une vulnérabilité. Quand la communauté ne peut plus gérer cet aléa naturel et cette exposition, là, quand ça la dépasse, là on parle de catastrophe. Et on enlève le mot naturel, c'est juste pour dire qu'on a quand même, en tant que communauté humaine, un grand rôle à jouer au niveau social, au niveau politique, au niveau économique, etc. Il ne faut pas dépolitiser non plus la question du changement climatique. Donc, le changement climatique vient aggraver, mais ce n'est pas quelque chose qui tombe du ciel et qu'on subit comme ça de manière passive. Il y a des solutions. Sur la question du conflit, alors pour le coup, encore une fois, sur la région que je couvre, donc il y a la région du Taco-Gourma, il y a le Sahel, encore une fois. Et c'est clair que, en tout cas, je profite de votre intervention pour dire que les gouvernements, notamment locaux et nationaux, les communautés sont confrontées à des enjeux énormes. En fait, se juxtapose la question climatique et la question du conflit. Et je voudrais souligner que la Croix-Rouge internationale a fait il y a 2 ans un rapport qui s'appelle When Rain Turns to Dust, où il démontre très bien comment, en fait, la mobilité humaine a toujours été une stratégie d'adaptation et que le conflit vient empêcher les communautés à s'adapter en les immobilisant. Donc c'est très très important de garder ça en tête, c'est-à-dire que le conflit vient impacter notre capacité d'adaptation au changement climatique, donc c'est clair que ce sont des urgences. Et donc l'objectif c'est aussi d'arriver à appuyer les gouvernements locaux, et les gouvernements nationaux à pouvoir gérer ça en même temps je pense que ça fait maintenant, on est passé du débat, on disait c'est qui la cause, c'est le changement climatique ou le conflit, on a passé notre temps à chercher qu'est-ce qui était la cause. Je pense que c'est mon avis personnel, et il est partagé par pas mal de collègues, ça sert à rien de se poser la question de la cause. Les gens sont en train de gérer des crises de manière juxtaposée et il faut qu'ils arrivent à... Et puis voilà. Donc l'idée c'est de remettre les choses dans leur contexte et puis de me donner les moyens d'agir pour adresser vraiment ces enjeux-là. Et je salue quand même les gouvernements, les autorités qui doivent vraiment faire, je pense notamment aux autorités nigériennes, qui doivent vraiment faire face à des enjeux qui sont énormes. Et alors sur la question du conflit hommes-animaux, je pense la question effectivement des échanges entre les communautés, alors des communautés très locales finalement qui vivent des questions, des problématiques locales, mais avec d'autres communautés ailleurs, c'est la coopération, on va dire, comment on appelle ça déjà, décentralisée par exemple. L'idée c'est et transfrontalière pour le coup, je pense que c'est important. Et à mon avis, peut-être que je me trompe, mais je pense que ça touche la question aussi de l'urbanisation encore. C'est-à-dire que j'ai lu un livre passionnant il y a pas longtemps qui s'appelle La fabrique des pandémies, justement. On va de plus en plus, pour des raisons économiques, structurelles, etc., empiéter sur le territoire de la vie sauvage. Et forcément, on va être de plus en plus, changement climatique aidant, confronté à ce genre de choses. Donc, la question d'une gestion intégrée d'un territoire et qui prenne en compte et les questions sociales, et les questions économiques, et les questions environnementales, et la question de l'urbanisation à outrance. Moi, je suis de Casablanca au Maroc, et clairement, la ville a complètement changé dans les dernières décennies. Et l'agriculture urbaine et périurbaine, par exemple, qui avait avant, qui contribuait à lutter contre les inondations, à nourrir la population, etc., est en train de disparaître. Et je remarque la même chose à Dakar, etc. Donc j'imagine que c'est le même phénomène. Donc ramener la biodiversité dans les villes, c'est important, mais aussi peut-être éviter d'empiéter trop sur le territoire. Enfin, c'est un début de réponse. Voilà, merci.
Okay, merci beaucoup, Roland. No, Hindi. Sorry for confusing names. Hindi. Okay. Oh, Hindi and Hind. Anyway, an I is missing. Sorry. I think the speakers try to answer your question. If you're not satisfied, you have time after this session. You can discuss deeper, go deeper with them, depending on their expertise. And you will have again another chance, if time allows, to have more time for questions. Anyway, now I have another set of questions, but I would like to speakers. But I would like to, when you give us your perspective in the other, can you tell us more about the collaboration? Because you're talking about transboundary challenges. We talked, Laura talked about the animal conflict with humans, which is happening in Kenya, cross-training, they have their experience. So now when you, for the next question, try to give us how countries can collaborate between communities, this kind of, because it helps, the Kenyans would help the Gabonese to understand better their elephants and things like that. So the next set of questions try to bring in more the collaboration between countries and between communities. Now, from your experience and perspective, I start with you, David. Could you highlight some regional or national experiences that have registered success, and how can this be promoted across the continent? So you see this collaboration between countries is coming in.
Success. Yeah, okay. Let's talk about success. I'll do so though in the context of the stage that I set when I last spoke, right? So we're still talking about power. The scene that I described was one of considerable risk that we will all confront in the coming years, associated with changing patterns of precipitation and other changes that are going to be very difficult for us to foresee, but we know that they're coming, and we know that they will exact a lot of bad outcomes on a lot of different stakeholders in energy systems around the continent. The solution to that I see as twofold. I see two very different but interrelated solutions to that challenge emerging in many marketplaces. The first involves creating linkages between energy systems in order to build resilience. So working with those big, centralized, complex energy systems and creating linkages between them, physical linkages in the forms of in many cases, high voltage transmission lines, to build resiliency so that when an energy system is suffering from some climate change caused transboundary environmental disaster, like a years-long flood that drains the resources behind the water behind the dam, they can connect to an energy system nearby that's not suffering nearly as badly. And we are making investments in Power Africa in that domain every day, and we will continue to do so. Just a few examples from around our portfolio. We broke ground this spring, just a couple of months ago, in Mozambique on a 600-kilometer line that will connect a corner of the country which is comparatively rich in renewable resources but poor in population. Right? So this new line will enable the transmission of renewable energy from where it's generated to where it needs to be consumed. Our friends at the U.S. Trade and Development Agency, that's one of those dozen agencies I referenced before as a critical member of the Power Africa Public-Private Partnership. So what they do is they sponsor feasibility studies to help establish the viability of very complex infrastructure projects in the world's emerging markets. So in this domain, USTDA is sponsoring feasibility studies for 600 to 700 kilometer high high voltage transmission lines that will connect, for example, Mozambique and Zambia, and also Cote d'Ivoire and Liberia. Having these systems interconnected with one another is a straightforward technical challenge, a very expensive one to deploy, and creating linkages such that we can allay risk associated with climate change. That is a generational project, not something we are going to accomplish by 2030. This is something where we as a donor community will be engaged for a generation. And the private sector too is along for that ride. But I promise you a twofold solution to the challenges I referenced. So I want to assure you there are solutions that we can deploy right now and at scale for hundreds of millions of Africans to build resilience and to help achieve energy access. And those solutions are distributed, renewable, resilient. So with distributed renewable energy deployed to communities that don't otherwise have access to these complex central grids for a comparatively very low cost, using energy as a service providers who are well entrenched in many of the most important markets that are presently underserved by reliable central grids. We can start rolling out solutions to challenges that will immunize these communities from risk associated with variable natural resources that will be exacerbated by climate change. So these are very much the kinds of activities. I should say that this is my portfolio. I work within Power Africa, but even deeper within that kind of extended family, I support energy access initiatives. So I have the great privilege of working with these companies and these technologies, rolling out solutions largely for the base of the pyramid. Our data suggests, and others back this up, that there are something on the order of 200 million African households that will be best served by these kinds of solutions. They will flow from the bottom up rather than from the central grid down. That's the work that we'll be engrossed in the coming years and even decades.
Thanks, David. Giving us those practical examples of linking different countries in terms of energy systems. I would like further to ask about how the private sector is coming in, how it can help it come out. Anyway, now from the human mobility perspective, which is an adaptive trend, as Ahmed said in him, how these have been impacted communities' well-being in the governance in Africa. Ahmed and him, can you give us your perspective and experience on this? Start by the one who is close to me.
Okay.
2 minutes.
Yes, thank you, Chair.
We don't have much time.
As we said, let's change the narrative. Migration is a tool for development. And we know that. Why? Because remittances to Africa accounts for over 60% in some places of GDP. And that is because people were able to move to other places to provide employment. People who move from rural areas to cities are able to also access better education, where the infrastructure in rural areas are very poor. People who are able to move access better health and also better employment. So let's not mix the narrative of movement of people with irregular migration, which tends to consume the whole discussion. And in that case, the African Union wants to harness, to support member states, to harness the potential of migration and mobility. As you know, Africa is a young continent. It's a very mobile continent. People are moving every day. Young people are crossing borders every day. And regularly, not irregularly. They are forced to move irregularly, but most of them move. So what we came up with
We came up with a collaborative effort between the African Union, the World Bank, IOM, UNDP, and the UNFCCC to create what we call the Africa Climate Mobility Initiative. Now, this initiative is there to provide support to member states, but also to bring together all the stakeholders so that we can zoom in on the benefits of migration within the context of climate change. We have had the first forum already that brought in stakeholders, including mayors in Africa, especially in areas where climate change is impacting those like Dakar, Durban, to discuss what are the practical ways by which we can share information, share best practices, but also to influence the policies within the continent itself. What we also are going to do this year, next month in October, October, we will have what we call the Pan-African Forum on Migration, which will be a ministerial and an expert meeting, and we're going to concentrate also on climate change, which will bring all the ministers of the member states of the African Union in Kigali to discuss how we can input the issue of the impact or the adverse impact of climate change on people, not just economies, but the socio-economic impact on people and how we can contribute that to the discussions in COP27. So that we can have a holistic, we can include communities, mayors, civil society, academia, so that we can have a holistic view of how we can mainstream climate change and migration within the African continent. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ahmed. So go ahead, Him.
Yeah, I might add that last month, in end of July, the IGAD and some member states from the EAC, so EAC, which is the Eastern Africa Community, signed the declaration of the Kampala Declaration on Migration, Environment and Climate Change. So ahead of COP27 also. So there's a definite, I mean, this is a extremely good initiative and example that we encourage other RECs, as we say, to replicate. So yeah, in the same vein that what Ahmed just said regarding the ACMI. I would like also to maybe to support, I mean, to mention the UN working group that we've founded and we are coordinating with UNOWAS, which is the UN Office for West Africa and the Sahel, and also UNFCCC and the UNEP. I hope you're all familiar with the acronyms. Our goal is to collaborate because we know that, I mean, we are the agency of migration and we need to collaborate with the colleagues who are experts, whose mandate is environment, climate change and other sectors. So it's extremely important that if we want to address that we have this collaboration first. And so the objective of this working group, it's been 1 year that we've established it, is to support ECOWAS in integrating climate change as a cross-cutting issue. So one of the outcomes of this young collaboration is that the new regional strategy of ECOWAS, climate strategy of ECOWAS, integrates human mobility. So for us, I mean, policy dialogue is also about, and policy coherence is also about collaboration, so we do encourage this. And also at a very local level, again, if we want to build nature-based solutions with the community and with the migrants, we need to collaborate with colleagues who are experts in agroforestry, agroecology, coastal resilience, etc. So, yeah.
Thank you very much, Him. We go to Aurora. with the different questions. What would be the transboundary intervention which could be applied in order to relieve the socioeconomic, environmental pressures in the face of the discussion on the climate change? 2 minutes because we don't have. Yeah.
I think there are so many different types of socioeconomic. Thank you. I think there are so many different socioeconomic interventions that could be done, and it depends on the sector that you're coming from. I think power is a really important one, and reaching people with those renewable energy solutions is key. The interventions of allowing free movement is also important. From my food security perspective, I would say, having climate information systems that are integrated into agricultural advisories, and those can be shared across countries. EGAD is a really good example of work that's being done in the Horn of Africa to share information. They have a climate prediction and application center that really does good work on producing forecasts seasonally, weekly, looking at droughts and floods and how can countries respond to that. So that's something I think other regions can learn from. And they also have been doing a lot of work on the issue of resilience to climate change and supporting pastoralists and others to build resilience to drought and to adapt. So I think, like Hind was saying, supporting these regional economic communities to work together and to address issues at a cross-national level is really important, because all of the plans that need to be submitted to UNFCCC, they're all national plans, but if we can get the RECs to help countries have dialogue on how the issues cross borders, I think that's really important. And then not just having those dialogues at the high level, but bringing in people from the communities going and looking at what is needed at the ground level, because things are very different depending on where you go. So that, getting those voices into the interventions is key, because you can't apply the same thing everywhere. So really understanding what are those interventions that are wanted by people, instead of just coming in and doing blanket work everywhere. So I would reiterate the climate info services for agriculture, because that really helps people improve their decision making in terms of what they are going to plant or where they're going to move their animals, and then supporting them with access to markets and things that can improve their livelihoods and their incomes from agriculture. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laura, for the interventions. I think we are towards the end of our session. Maybe we have only 5 minutes, I think, left, or 10. 5 only. So from these last topics we had on collaboration, I think collaboration is quite important in terms of if we need to get to the objectives of this. Collaboration between countries, between communities is really key. Another point maybe which is data information sharing, because sometimes what we are saying are they are available in the public domain. Do you have, can we have access, or is still just for you and that's it? So data sharing and information availability to decision makers is quite important in this kind of collaboration. Yes, Liliane?
This is an invited question, but I'm just curious, and this is a question to you, Dr. Bush, from the African Union Commission. So I come from a country that is neighboring Kenya, that's Uganda, and in the northern part we have pastoralists, right? And during the dry season especially, this has been common from time immemorial, so we cannot entirely blame it on climate change. But what we've seen is that due to climate change, there's increased movements across the borders. So pastoralists come from the Turkana region of Kenya, and then they move into the Karamoja region of Uganda, and likewise. And if you know about the history of Uganda, there's been lots of cattle rustling and lots of trade of guns, because they exchange guns for people to come into the country and let their cattle drink and eat some pasture from across the Ugandan border. And the Ugandans also do that. So when you talk about the free mobility policies that the African Union is trying to implement, what boggles my mind is, what does this mean for the local person who, first of all, is not aware about this policy? All they know is a traditional method of going across the border, selling guns for people to come in, or maybe trading cattle, or just going around to rustle, right? And this has been exacerbated by climate change. And today we are talking about the transboundary, the common challenges, because this is a common challenge. And where does a collaboration come in? Because I'm aware that the Ugandan government is trying all that it can to take the guns away from the people, but that has not been successful. And likewise the Kenyan government. So to what level is the African Union intervening in such common challenges that are made worse by climate change? I don't know if there are any other questions, so it can all be answered at once.
What question, please? What?
Maybe something very quickly. As we have said before, climate change is both a direct cause of mobility, but also exacerbates this cross-border movement. The problem is usually the management between the two country borders. Their systems do not communicate. So the formation of the Africa Climate Mobility Initiative is to actually bring this issue on the table. First of all, in the African Union itself, we have what we call an interdepartmental coordination mechanism, where we are working from our department, which is Migration Department, with agriculture, with peace and security, with trade, mining and industry, and with education, so that we can actually come up with a kind of a common solution. Then the next is to engage member states. As we said, if mobility was enhanced on the continent, this illegal trading in arms will not be there. Why? Because there will be better coordination between the governments of countries where you have got these cross-border communities. It's not only in terms of pastoralists, but also women trading. Most of the majority of trading is cross-border trading, mostly by women. You see the same case between Rwanda and Congo. You see the same probably in Gabon and Cameroon, or Ghana and Togo, Nigeria and Niger. All cross-border communities have the same issue. In Ghana, the same thing. They trade in arms. Why? Because the Ghanaians will say, you are not a Ghanaian, so you can't cross the border and come and graze in our land, because the two governments are not discussing. So what we are trying to do is to mainstream migration into the climate change policy dialogue, so that member states can see it as an equally important issue in terms of how they've seen trade in the ACFTA. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I think time is against our session, but I think the speakers have given us key points which we can take home. But before I can let them go, I have to torture them more. Half a minute or a minute. Can you tell us, give us one thing? Can you give us at least two things which working well so far, and when it comes, of course, to collaboration and to climate change, and what can Africa do to improve address the challenges you have mentioned so far? So there are so many. Just 1 minute, tell us which things which you think as well. Please, only 2, not more. If you have 1, it's fine as well. So that will be the take-home message now from you guys.
I think I would reiterate the success that EGAT is having in terms of helping support the Horn of Africa and the work that they're doing to collaborate and coordinate between the countries in terms of responding to drought and dealing with climate change. So I think other regional economic communities can learn from that example and what they're doing now.
Okay, for me, just 2 things. One, the Africa Climate Mobility Initiative brings together all the stakeholders: UN Climate, IOM, UNDP, the World Bank. And I think that this sort of collaborative effort is very important because on the continent we know that we don't only face challenge of funding, but also sometimes the developmental partners come in and they compete against each other. Okay, so we want to send it, we want to kind of bring everybody on the same table, talking about the same thing and sharing the same resources to achieve the same goal. So for me, as a person who is the contact point for climate change, this is the collaborative effort that I'm looking at. The second part will be that we're looking at using this interdepartmental coordination mechanism to extend that again to the RECs and to the member states, because the African Union building block is the RECs. Once they get the policy directions, then they can then specifically deal with their own member states within their own area. Thank you.
Very briefly. So when I last spoke, I described a top-down approach and then a bottom-up. And I'll say that we are 1,000 miles from a successful deployment of a top-down approach, this spider web of high-voltage transmission lines across the continent, interconnecting vulnerable energy systems with less vulnerable energy systems. But I would say good news, it's very important to end on good news, is that we're making what I consider to be really spectacular progress on the bottom-up approach, so the second that I described. There's momentum building there. There's a lot of capital flowing into that sector. One of the most exciting deliverables from my perspective coming out of COP26 was the $10 billion devoted by the Rockefeller Foundation through the Global Energy Alliance for People and the Planet. They're here with us, continuing the conversation right now. All oriented, substantially all of it oriented towards universal electrification via these bottom-up distributed renewable energy solutions. Personally, I'm very excited to see where all of that leads.
Thank you very much, David. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. I would say...
Half a minute.
Yeah, I will be... Well, am I famous to talk too much?
Which is good.
No, I don't know. No, I mean, Kampala Declaration, on migration, environment and climate change is very promising and definitely, I mean, goes in the same vein than what my colleague Ahmed was saying.
Okay, I think it's been
12 seconds.
12 seconds. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we are at the end of our session, but before we can leave, I have Lady Marcela from the UNFCCC who would like to close the session. Thank you very much. Marcela, welcome.
This is a very quick closing of the session, not only of the session, but actually of this track 2 on resilience. What I wanted to say is that the intention of the Secretariat in putting together this track was the first day yesterday, for those that participated with us, was to discuss and also to highlight not only the need for adaptation that goes without saying, but also the power of transformation in proper adaptation policies, transformation towards the goals of the Paris Agreement. And today what we have been doing is to highlight the potential of transformative adaptation in different sectors, and today in this panel also the power of collaboration. It was mentioned before, right? I mean, the importance of sharing information, the importance of learning from each other, and the importance from listening, not only at the level of governments, at the level of communities, but also the human level, the needs of the people that are actually living the impact. All I can say right now is thank you very much for the panel, and through you to all the participants of all our panels and moderators, and to all of you for participating. And I have to say one thing. Thank you also for Lillian. Lillian is a fellow in the Secretariat, and she's single-handed putting together all of these panels. So thank you very much to all of you, and success for the next 2 days of the Climate Week.